Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Timeline of Life lesson on the Cambrian Period. We learned in the second grade lesson about the beginnings of life on Earth, and today we're going to learn more about the Cambrian Period. The Cambrian Period is the first period of the Paleozoic Era. Here's our Paleozoic Era. And the Cambrian Period is the very first period of this era. It lasted for 55.6 million years. That's 55,600,000 years. And it started 541 million years ago. And it ended 485.4 million years ago. Before the Cambrian period, back here, that's not on our timeline. Before the Cambrian period, there was life on Earth. This is not the very beginning of life on Earth. There was life on Earth, but it was very simple life, mostly single-celled creatures like bacteria that lived in the oceans. The Cambrian period is so very interesting because many new kinds of life and more complicated creatures appeared on Earth. All of the life on Earth still stayed in the oceans, though, at this point. And the Earth was very hot. Most of the land was together, and there was more water in the oceans than there is now because the Earth was so hot that we didn't have polar ice caps. So all of the water that's in the polar ice caps right now was melted at that time, and it was part of the ocean. In fact, the Earth was so hot that it was usually between 120 and 140 degrees. So the creatures that used to be single-celled organisms grew and grew, got much bigger, and some of them learned to swim. Before this, creatures didn't really move. Some also developed hard shells, and others learned to hunt. So we can see on our timeline here, the first seaweed started in the Cambrian era, Cambrian period of the Paleozoic era. We also see that these guys right here, these trilobites, are they come into being. And there were many kinds of trilobites. That was one of the most common kinds of creatures during the Cambrian period. But there were many kinds of creatures. And animals begin to have hard shells. And some scientists think that that is because other creatures learned how to hunt. And so the creatures that were being hunted needed to figure out a way to protect themselves. So what we're going to do on our timeline here is we have the timeline up here with all of the creatures already added, and we have the timeline down here that's empty. Okay, and we sent home with you the timeline and this paper with a bunch of little pictures on it. So we are going to add our pictures from here onto the timeline on the bottom to match the one on the top. So I'm going to look first here, and I see the first seaweed. And when I look at my paper, I see the first seaweed down here at the bottom. So I'm going to cut that out. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the pictures are small, so I do want to be careful. There we go. There's my first seaweed. So I'm going to put it here next to the label for the first seaweed. It looks like I might need to cut a little bit more paper off the bottom. There we go. And then I see this picture of the trilobite. And if I look around on my paper here, I see there's the trilobite. So I'm going to cut that one out now. There we go. I'm going to put it right there. And then I see this picture here, which looks like maybe some more seaweed, like the fossil of a plant, but it might be some other kind of animal. There were many really strange looking animals in the Cambrian period. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I am trying to be careful. There we go. All right. And then looks like we have one more that we have on our timeline in the Cambrian period. It says animals begin to have hard shells. We have a lot of fossils here with hard shells. And if I look at my paper, I see it right there. This one's kind of big. I have to cut around pretty carefully. There we go. All right. I'm going to move this out of the way. All right. And there are my animals with hard shells. And so I think so that my pictures stay where I want them to, I'm going to use a little glue and glue them down here in a minute. So that is how we are going to use our timeline today. Have a good afternoon.